travel demand model, and this current task order is doing some training, and these training scenarios were identified by a core group that Bruce convened, and basically those members of the core group, if you want to call it that, Bruce, or pilot group, were from Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Missouri. And each state presented some traffic issues that they thought might be interesting to see what the results were from the shift model. So our team of Liza and Zuhan in Houston have run all these scenarios, and Liza's going to go through each of these. Bruce, is there any need to go out of order? I think I heard Virginia say that they had to get off soon, and right now we have Arkansas as the fourth scenario that we were going to run. And so I don't know if you want to give preference to Virginia, but and if there's anyone else that can't stay for the full 2.5 hours, I think our intent was to spend about 30 minutes on each scenario, so or each state.
Well, I mean, we can change the order if no one has any objection.
We don't need to do that. I mean, no, we don't need this. We're going to be on probably till about 1:45, so I can imagine everything taking 30 minutes. But I do have a question before we get started. What should I be able to see on my screen right now? I'm at the CDM meet, the meet.cdmsmith.com, and I've got a bunch of icons that indicate there's 16 people on the call, but that's all I see.
So if I did it correctly, I tried to share the agenda. Can anyone else see the agenda?
Yes.
I see it.
Okay, so did you use, I guess, Virginia, did you use the web application?
I used the link that you guys sent.
Okay.
I mean, I've got it, and it says there's 16. Hold on a second. What's that thing at the bottom? I've already done that a couple of times. Is it? Should I be using a specific icon across the bottom?
Hey, I don't know what how to open up the web portion of this. The new information that's not conference call, freeconferencecall.com doesn't have a web link for the actual web part.
Do you see what looks like an agenda?
You're in the Skype meeting, Virginia?
I clicked on the link that says join Skype meeting, and it redirected me to the meet.cdmsmith.com/Bostrom NR/HFNL5R3Q.
I got no redirect. I just get an error.
Michael's got it up on his machine. I'll go out and sit with Michael, and we'll do it from his machine on our side of the equation.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, and Bruce, I don't know if, I think the meeting that Rob set up that was just between the three of us, can you maybe forward that to anyone who's having trouble, that meeting invite directly? I don't know if something happened with a copy and paste. So is anyone else currently having trouble seeing the webinar?
Yeah, me. I'm not. This is Eric Johnson. I can't get into it at all.
All right. Do you want me to maybe forward you? Excuse me, I don't know your email address, but if you could give it to me, I can.
Yeah, I have the email open myself right now, Liza, if you want to focus on that.
Eric, I just forwarded you the email that Bruce just sent.
Yeah, that's the same link I had. It opens up something with a group conversation in the link application, but I'm the only one in it. It says starting conference call. Share, show stage. I look at the stage, and I'm the only one there, and there's nothing in the... Starting conference call. I'm sorry. Maybe it's trying to log in somehow.
What's your last name, Eric?
Johnson.
Johnson. Okay. Yeah, I think I have your.
The link application says something is starting, but it's just not there.
And that's for the Skype link?
Yeah, I've had problems with Skype link before.
Yeah, sometimes IT blocks certain things.
Yeah.
Well, I will say all of these, I have broken out each scenario by state into separate presentations. And of course, all of those can be or will be distributed. And I'm planning, and I'll record this training so that we have audio of it as well.
That'd be great.
In the interest of time, would you be okay if I proceeded?
Absolutely. From Virginia, Florida. Proceed.
Okay. Yeah, so the order of the scenarios is shown here on the agenda. The first one being Georgia, which is they selected an I-75 truck-only lane for analysis. The second one, Kentucky selected the I-69 project to evaluate. The third is Louisiana looking at flooding scenarios. The fourth, Arkansas, looked at closures on the Mississippi River bridge crossings as well as a new Madrid event. And then the last scenario by Missouri is looking at I-70 under work zone conditions. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on the first scenario. Okay, so I now have a PowerPoint presentation showing. Can anyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Again, so each of these scenarios will go through a similar presentation, the same structure. So as I move further along, if I start flying through these, please stop, interrupt me, ask questions, and make this interactive. I'm sure everyone will be sick of hearing me talk after a while. But each scenario will go over the project background, the modeling steps to code and evaluate the project, and then what are the results. For scenario one, we're looking at a northbound truck-only lane that runs parallel to I-75. This is a 2-lane facility that is not tolled, and the current scenario has 2 intermediate access points at exit 102 and 118. It's about 61 miles in length that connect Macron to Atlanta. And the purpose for this is to review how the model compares to the statewide model. So slide 5 shows the limits of the study area. Again, you can see, the arrows going northbound, the 2 access points in the middle. And for the modeling steps, again, this slide is going to be consistent on every presentation, but it's important because there's a lot of information that the model package includes that can be used as a reference and a guide. The latest model delivered was the September 20th, 2016 model that includes enhancements and additional functionality based on the scenarios that were run for this effort. And that model was based on the previous phase of this study, which had a deliverable in January of this year. I recommend running all scenarios in Transcad 6 Release 2 Build 9085. And
I have a question. My
yes.
Transcad model is already version 7. Is that okay or is not?
Unfortunately, that's not okay. Transcad 7 caliper has various enhancements and changes that they've made, including changes to all geographic files. So if you open a geographic file that was developed in Transcad 6, if you open that in Transcad 7, it's not backwards compatible.
Okay, so that means I need to install the Transcad 6.
Correct.
Well.
Yes.
Okay. When I install the Transcad, do I need to install all the data?
No, if it's already installed with Transcad 7, then you can cross-reference for the data.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Good question. And Trung, I know you and I have worked together to test in different builds of Transcad 6, and we found some complications there as well. So I guess bottom line is if you have this build, it should work seamlessly. Other builds, there could be issues. Okay. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, so if you guys don't mind muting your mics, that would be great. So there are a couple of reference materials that I strongly recommend looking over before running a scenario, and that's the model documentation. And that includes a user's guide on how to install and run and operate the model interface, as well as some additional practice scenarios.
Liza, just for the sake of everybody, that's all posted on that GIS data link that I've been sending to everybody. So all those manuals and documents have been posted online, and they've been available on that shared link.
Thanks, Bruce. Okay, and then the last point I wanted to make is the Shift model was developed to be installed on the C drive. You can, it does have functionality to be installed in any directory, but the default is the C drive. So just be sure to reference the user's guide when installing and running the model. Okay, so there are 6 main modeling steps that are used for these scenarios. Most important, step 1 is to identify and understand the project and to determine if any modifications are needed to the model. Not only network edits, but in some cases we found that the model needed actual functionality changes. So for this scenario, we did not have functionality for truck-only facilities. And what that means is we only wanted to be able to assign trucks, the truck class, to certain roads and not allow autos on these facilities. So the assignment script was updated to restrict the auto class from utilizing a selection set of roads. And to do that, we added a truck-only field to the master network, which is a flag field of either zeros or 1, and the 1 reflects those links that are truck-only. The second step is to code the project and input project IDs into the master network. So that's coding the geography of the project, snapping nodes and making an appropriate alignment to meet the project description, and also filling in any necessary attributes. And for this project, that's again the truck-only field, which is new, as well as the project underscore ID1 field. And that's the field that you will code in a user-defined project ID. This user-defined project ID is linked from the highway network, the master network, to a project list file, which is a CSV file. And so once you define the project ID, you have to enter it in both sources so that when you create the scenario using the scenario manager, it will export the correct links using the correct attributes as your scenario network. One other note is the project list includes the required attributes needed for each scenario, and I'll go into that in more detail in the next slide. But those attributes are number of lanes, area type, and functional classification. The fourth step is to do some validation of the study area. Anytime as you know, this is a national network, very large region, so it's always good to do some validation to make sure that connectivity is appropriate, road attributes are defined correctly, and that includes mainly just lanes and functional class and area type. Those are the 3 key attributes for this model. And then also making sure that the centroid connectors provide appropriate access. The zones are very large, or not very large, relatively large. They're at the county level within the LAT study area. And so that's a lot of trips being loaded via a small number of centroid connectors. So a lot of times it's appropriate to add more centroid connectors to provide for more connectivity.
I have a question for this truck-only lane.
Yes.
Is the speed limit the same as the other lanes, or it's lower?
So in this scenario, that's a very good question. In this scenario, it is the same, but that is definitely a lever that you can change for sensitivity testing.
Okay. And another question: are they supposed that the trucks can pass over each other, or there's no passing zone for that truck-only lane?
It is a 2-lane northbound facility. Mm-hmm. So trucks I guess the model doesn't do simulation.
Okay.
Not at the operational level, but
Okay.
it's a 2-lane facility.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes? Okay. And then the last 2 steps, of course, running the scenarios, running a no-build case versus a build scenario for comparison. And for all of these scenarios, we ran 2040 as the analysis year under E plus C, existing plus committed conditions. Okay, I wanted to briefly just talk a little more detail about the coding steps. And really just, there's a lot of information on this slide. I kind of went with a little more detail, but what I wanted to get across is that there were changes that needed to be made to get the model to appropriately reflect the project conditions for the I-75 truck-only lanes. So of course that means coding in the I-75 truck-only lane, which is the red link shown in this image, and it's parallel to I-75, and then adding access points. And those access points are to Century connectors or the actual highway link. And there's connectors between I-75 and I-75 truck only. And in step 3, there are 3 different project IDs defined. And the reason for this is because the area type, this is like I said, a 70 or 61 mile length project. So you can imagine the area type changes as you get, from the metro areas into rural and then back to the metro. Okay, now on slide 11, I want to talk a little bit about the model results. And this slide shows the daily volumes. We're looking at total daily volume as well as truck volume. And we'll compare between the no build and the build for I-75 and parallel facilities. You can see, if you look at the first row for the I-75 truck only lanes, of course the build has 0 volume. The no build has 0 volume, and the build has volume. And this just shows the diversion that occurs. The main line, I-75, the trucks decrease by just over half and divert to the truck-only lane. So not all trucks were diverted. US 19 does not really show much of a change. And so this is where you could do some sensitivity testing with speeds or even maybe restricting trucks from the I-75 main lines and forcing all of them to go on to the truck only. So there are options to play with the model. But one thing I think is important to do is to look at the relative change and not necessarily the magnitude change. And the reason why is because the model, even looking at the base year or the existing volumes that the model is showing on I-75, the model is low. It tends to underestimate traffic. But the relative change should be, is the best use of the model for its sensitivity. So that's why looking at percent change is always a good idea. And that shows it, the percent trucks drop from 20% in the no build to 11% in the build on I-75. I also wanted to show you some analysis options that can be run to look at the results, and one of them is just the bandwidth flow maps. And we looked at these for all scenarios and all sub-scenarios. A side note is the presentation does not include all of these maps because it would be just a very long presentation, but I have them available as desired. But going back and forth, you can see between the no build and the build, the pattern is the same. It's basically volume is shifting to the truck volume is shifting to the truck only lane. Another interesting viewpoint is to look at various select links, and here are 3 different ones that show between the no build and the build, where's traffic coming from and where is it going to utilizing the link. And so it makes sense for I-75 truck only that there would be 0 volume because it doesn't exist in the no build. You can see the patterns where they're coming from and going to in the build. And then on I-75 mainline, you can see how the volume, the bandwidth thickness decreases, and that's because more traffic is using the truck only.
The bandwidth thickness decreases, and that's because.
Nope. I think I hear myself again. Okay, then the last slide that I wanted to share, and this is again common with the other scenarios, but how are the outputs compatible with other programs? Not everyone has Transcad. For those that do, again, it's not compatible with Transcad 7. It may not be compatible with other builds, but it does have functionality to export geographic files into shapefile format, as well as tables into database DBF files that you can utilize other software for further analysis. Okay. Let's see. Now I am going to present this, getting a little bit of feedback.
Can y'all mute? If you're not speaking, can you mute? Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
I can't see anything on the screen.
Sorry, yes,
Okay, you're working on that.
Getting that now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, now can you see my desktop for the Kentucky scenario, which is scenario 2? Great.
Yes, I can.
Okay. For the Kentucky scenario is the I-69 project. Again, I'll go over the background, the modeling steps, and the results. So this scenario is actually broken up into 2 sub-scenarios. We ran a scenario 2A and a scenario 2B, where scenario A includes improving the Ohio River bridges, as well as US 41 Penny Ryle Parkway to interstate standards within Kentucky. Scenario B includes scenario A, but also includes upgrading various facilities to I-69 interstate standards from Indiana to Texas. The purpose of this is to calibrate state models as well as look at regional flows and comparisons for traffic shifts. We took the alignment from the i69info.com website, and the green links in this map show those links in the shift model that were identified to be upgraded for I-69. Some of these facilities are new facilities. A lot of them are existing roads upgraded to interstate standards. And I'll kind of quickly go through each segment, but this next slide on slide 6 shows the I-69 project limits, and it connects the existing I-69 up in Evansville, Indiana, down to where I-69 meets with Western Kentucky Parkway. For scenario B, we, start a little further up in Indiana, running along Highway 37 to connect Interstate 69 near Evansville. And then moving further down into the lower part of Kentucky and into Tennessee. And then going from Mississippi, Arkansas, into Louisiana. Now, the website that we took this alignment from did include a couple locations of new alignment, which we coded in. They did have show a couple of alternate options, but we chose, the first one listed and went with that. And then moving on from Louisiana and into Texas, from Shreveport to Houston, and then down from Houston to the border. So this is a pretty big project spanning multiple states. And I'm going to skip over this slide, but again, this is how you access the model in those reference documentation. And these are the 6 steps again for modeling the scenario. The biggest thing that should be stated here is defining those user-defined project IDs. Again, I'll go through this on the next slides. And we have our modeler who did a lot of this work, took print screens of each step that he did. It's a bit excessive, but we have that information. I think for this scenario, he has around 300 different print screens. But if you're interested, it really does give you a step-by-step picture of what he did to code the project.
Liza, Casey Wells had a quick question on that. I don't know if you saw it.
I did not. Sorry, I can't see any of that, so you'll have to let me know.
The question was, does a project ID field and the project list file have to be filled in to create a scenario?
And the answer is yes. There is the project _ID1 field. The values in there need to match the values in your project list file. There's a field in that file called project, I think maybe project _ID1. But the network and the list file are joined together by project ID1 to create your scenario network. So that's that project underscore ID1 is your linkage to creating your scenario.
Thank you, Liza.
Yes. So one thing we did in this scenario is add a new field to the master network called I69 underscore upgrade. This is not required for the model run. It was just added so that we can easily select those links that are to be upgraded. This scenario did include coding new facilities, adding new links, updating the project attributes, and in step 3, defining those user-defined scenario IDs, which there are a lot of because there's a lot of different attributes combinations that need to be accounted for. One other thing that was interesting about this scenario is that there were some overlap between this scenario and scenario 4, which was the Arkansas New Madrid event. So since there's only one project ID that can be listed on each link, you have to be a little bit creative in defining the project ID. So that's a little side note. So for the daily volumes, I broke this out by sub-scenario. And this image shows the volumes on the first segment within Kentucky of I-69. And we compare I-69 Pennyroyal Parkway, which shows an increase of about 10,000 vehicles per day with the improvement compared to some parallel facilities, which are shown by those red links in the image to the bottom. Now, you can see not all the traffic is diverted, from these facilities. There's a lot of other options that drivers can use.
This is probably a good point to remind you that the trip table is a static trip table. It's not composed of socioeconomic data, so it's not able to generate brand new trips. The trips are shifted, which is a good name, I guess, since it's a shift model, but they're not actually new trips being generated.
Exactly. Yeah, so this model is a very good tool to look at routing shifts, but not new origins and destinations or changes in origins and destinations.
Well, I have a question. Looking at these numbers, I think the traffic shifted.
Could you get closer? Could you get closer to the microphone? It's difficult to hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Okay. By looking at these numbers, I figured that the traffic shifted from other routes to I-69 is not equal to the difference between no build and build. In other words,
Yep.
These numbers don't add up.
Correct. Yes, this is not a true screen line. So there are other roads that I-69 is pulling traffic from that aren't shown in this table.
Oh, I see. Okay, so there are some traffic attracted from other roads, which not listed in here.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, these are just a handful of parallel facilities, but not all the possible ones.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Liza.
Sure. And this is a similar summary for scenario 2B, which is a much longer facility, but you can also see where, so maybe I'll explain the map first. The image shows in green those I-69 links that are defined for the project. The links shown in red are the selected links that are pulled to summarize in the table shown on slide 19. And you can see, up by Indiana, the first 3 rows of the table, that the I-69 portion is a new alignment or a new segment. So it did not exist in the no build, and it attracts 13,000 vehicles per day in the build and diverts a lot of it from I-57. And again, these aren't true screen lines, so there's other means of diversion. And then as you move along further south into Tennessee and Arkansas, I-69 runs along US 51, and most of this traffic is coming from, or is diverted from I-55. Very little is taken from I-40. And then in Arkansas, I-69 runs along US 278 with a big chunk of traffic relief on I-30. And then down in Texas, US 59 runs along, or US 69 runs along, sorry, I-69 runs along US 59. And some of the traffic is diverted from I-10, and there's other routes in there that are not shown.
One rule of thumb that we've used in traffic forecasting, and it varies from agency to agency, consultant to consultant, is the notion of induced traffic. So while you get diverted traffic on a road like this, you also get brand new traffic or so-called induced traffic. That typically for a road like this might be 25 or 30%. It opens new traffic opportunities for travel. Then you also might get some new generation going on. So certainly this would draw, I-69 would draw some more trips, is the bottom line.
Yeah, and especially in the more urban areas, you notice that sort of induced traffic phenomenon. And then, like the previous scenario, we have some bandwidth flow maps for referencing the shift in volume. Again, the pattern is the same, but you can see the magnitude change. And then also looking at select link analysis, we see for I-57, which is part of scenario 2A. Actually, both of these are part of scenario 2A. The build is pulling more traffic from St. Louis, and US 41 is pulling more traffic, relatively proportionally in both. This next slide shows more select link analysis, and you can see there are starting to be a little more shifts in the patterns. So And then finally, this is the same slide about compatibility with other programs.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Is this Transcat model ever compared to the what they call the VSOM? I think the VSOM is their simulation model for the operation.
So are you talking about Transmodeler?
No. I think it's Transmodeler. No, that's a different thing. VSOM.
VSOM?
VISSUM, which is the German software used for the trip forecast. I never used it, but I heard that some DOTDs use the VSOM instead of Transcat. I'm just wondering, is that
I'll answer that. When we went through this, the states voted to do the work in Transcat.
Oh,
so that
okay.
Yeah, and usually VSOM, my understanding, is a little more smaller in scale, evaluating projects on a smaller scale.
Okay. Okay, just curious. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, the third scenario is the flooding scenarios in Louisiana. So this scenario consists of 3 sub-scenarios. All are interstate flooding scenarios. The first one is closure of I20 in Bossier City. The second one is closure of I10 near the Sabine River. And the third is what if both interstates were closed? And the purpose is to look at larger regional distributions along the interstate corridors. So slide 5 shows the closure limits for I-20, both in the eastbound and westbound directions. Slide 6 shows the closure limits of I-10 in both directions. I'm going to skip over this slide, as you've seen it before. Now, to do a closure scenario, we added functionality to the model to be able to enable it to recognize 0 lanes. Previously, if you put a 0 in for number of lanes, it would crash because it would try to assign it some sort of capacity, and that just isn't allowed with 0 lanes. So we modified the script to reflect 0 lanes. So if you ever want to test a scenario, the attributes for number of lanes would be 0. You wouldn't need to delete the link or break a link or anything like that. You could just change the number of lanes. And again, the important points here are to make sure you code the project IDs, the user-defined project IDs corresponding to your project limits in both the master network, and verify that those are in the project list with the associated number of lanes, area type, and functional classification. Now, with closing a link, one thing you have to verify in step 4, in the validation step, is to make sure that zones still have access to the highway system. If a Centroid connector is connected to one of the links that are closed, that's okay, but you also need to make sure there's another connector that's connected to a link that is not closed. Otherwise, the model will crash and not run completely. So again, this scenario was run using the based on the 2040 E plus C scenario. And I broke this one out by the 3 scenarios to show the defined project IDs for 3A, 3B, and 3C. And I'll state it again. So the scenario _3_A_1 is the project ID on link 65083. That project ID is also in the project list, where the project list has 3 attributes that are defined: area type based on a code, functional class based on a code, and number of lanes. And these codes are defined in the model documentation. For scenario A, we did make modifications to the centroid connectors by adding additional connectors to reflect access points to US 79 and I-49. Scenario B, we had to split some links to define the actual project limits. Some of the links in the master network are long and may cross, county boundaries, or, may not exactly align with your project limits, so you may have to do some splitting of links. The daily volume results are shown on slide 12 of this presentation. You can see the first row is I20, which is for scenario 3A, that is closed in the future. So the volume goes from 60,000 in the no build to 0 in the build. And some of that traffic is shifted to Highway 82, I-10, and State Highway 9.
Hey, Liza, this is Bruce Lambert. I just simply forgot. We never did explain that you're using the 2040 network to all the states. I mean, you don't have to do it now, but when we get to the end of the scenario, you might want to reference that.
Yes. So every scenario that we're talking about today is based on the 2040 existing plus committed highway network or scenario. So all projects are coded into the future year 2040 E plus C network. You can run these in other scenario years as you see fit. The other year that the model has is 2014. Okay, and then again, the bandwidth maps between the no build and the build. This one you can see. Can you guys see my mouse when I move it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I know these are hard. It's a hard scale to look at, but I-20 here in the center of the image on slide 13 is open in the no build. When it closes in the build, you can see the diversion that is occurring. And then same for I-10. This is the build volumes. Let's see, do I not have a no build? But I-10 is closed, and there's traffic diverting to the south. I'm sure some's diverting up to the north as well.
2 questions on this. This is Thomas Hill with FDOT. Can I chime in?
Yes, please.
First, how did you evaluate evacuation traffic? Because if the area, say around 20 and 10, is going to be closed due to flooding, did you represent those populations that need to evacuate?
The short answer is no. The model is a fixed OD trip table. So as far as populations that need to evacuate, one way you could do it is, factoring the OD trips within the vicinity of the closure.
I guess that leads to the other question. Looking at your diversion, if, for example, 20 is being closed or I-10 is being closed, wouldn't the routes that you are diverting from be closed as well?
And that's a very likely scenario. And that's something that could be further tested for sure.
Well, I guess the 2 points is that whenever you have a critical evacuation or a critical situation where you're closing lanes, your demand is going to change. It's not going to be your typical demand. And B, the latent demand that's being generated is going to be magnified by the corresponding routes that are there. You're not going to have this.
Yeah, like this is definitely a first step at looking at what would happen. There's a lot more detail and sophistication that can go into analyzing a closure further.
Thomas, this is Bruce. The focus was not so much on trying to model everything, but just simply to see the impact on regional truck movements from the closure. So your question of evacuation was kind of outside the scope of what this was really kind of looking at. But I will say this, that, having gone through 2 floods in the past year, there was a lot of trucks that just simply didn't move, period, especially in the August floods, because there was no redundant routes. So the question is, yes, you could probably go back through this, and we have the trip tables for both passenger and truck, and you could probably go back through on the local area and kind of reassign truck trips or local traffic, in the counties with those centroids. But that was kind of that outside the scope of what we were trying to do here, was just simply look at a gross diversion of traffic, one closure.
Well, I guess I would go back to the demand, and the routing of freight and trucks is going to be contingent upon loading of roadways, right? So if you're not estimating your demand correctly, then you're not really estimating your routing.
Yeah, this is assuming that the demand, there's no change in demand between the no build and the closure. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, of course.
Liza, that could be put in pretty easily, though, for trucks to, if there, or maybe not easily, but if there's a change in trip length, maybe there's a means of some kind of workaround, that they wouldn't make the trip, or some percentage would be delayed. I mean, that's kind of that's almost a post-processing change, but it could be done.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good comments, though.
Okay, and then slide 17 shows select link analysis for the I20 closure. And the one on the bottom is I20 in the vicinity of the closure. So in the build, there's no volume, you can see that. But the other 2 routes, you can see more of a shift from the no build to the build case, where these parallel facilities are carrying more traffic. Especially you can see on US 82 where there's more vehicles diverting from 20 north to US 82 and then potentially back down to I-20.
I have a question. This is Paul from Louisiana. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
If I want to model some other closures on other parts of the road, can I just simply change the coding for that link to number of lanes to 0, or I needed to do some other things?
There's two ways you can do it. I would say the correct way would be to go into the master network and add a project ID onto the road link, and then make sure that project ID is also included in the project list that you're using. And in the project list, you define 3 attributes: the area type, the number of lanes, and the functional class. And that's where you would change the number of lanes to be 0. And then you would go into the model interface, create a scenario, and then you can run your scenario. A quick and dirty way would be to go into an existing scenario run, identify the link that you want to close, and you would need to change 2 attributes. One would be the number of lanes to 0, and another would be, I think it's called FCLN. It's basically a code that combines the functional class and the number of lanes, and that's what's used to look up the speed and capacity information.
Okay. Thank you.
And once you get into that, you can shoot me an email or give me a call.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Liza? Got a question from Kentucky again about if the project list file is a bin file.
The project list file is a CSV file. Let's see, I think I presented my desktop. Can you guys see Transcad? All right, let's see.
See a black screen.
Okay. So let's look at maybe 3A. So can you guys see my folder
Yes.
directory? Okay. So the project list is a CSV file that has just 4 fields. One is for the project ID, the user-defined project ID. Area type, which we call RU code, functional class, and number of lanes. So these initial projects are E+C projects. And then at the very end, we've coded the scenario projects. And this is, in all of these scenarios are road closures, so the number of lanes is 0. They're on interstate links, so the functional class is 1. The reason that there's 3 is because the project goes through different area types, a rural, urban, and suburban. Any questions on the project list?
Are there any other attributes that are modifiable through the CSV file?
Not through the CSV file. through the master network, there are various attributes, some of the new ones that we added, such as the truck only attribute. If you wanted to restrict autos from any facility, you would need to change the value in this field to 1. But the rest of the attributes are more for reference. We have count data, information from FAF, HPMS, and then, the road name and signage information. In the master network, the 2014 base year fields can also be manually edited. And then, of course, the project ID 1 field. And in the model documentation, there's a section that will discuss, the required model attributes versus just reference or descriptive model attributes.
Liza, I've got another question. When you mentioned that the truck is a static OD matrice, is that matrice have different commodity codes, so it has multiple cores in it?
It does not. It's a single truck vehicle trip table.
If you wanted to take a particular county, and let's say that a major manufacturer chooses to move into that county, do you have an example or can describe how you might simulate the increase in truck traffic that such a facility, or cars for that matter too, would generate?
So for this model, that would require manipulation to the input OD trip table. It basically, everything now is static. You would have to go in, there's, let's see. There's a lot in here, but the final truck trip table, the zones within the LATS region are at the county level. And you could identify the row and column of a particular county and factor up and down the trips as you feel. If you want to say we expect the truck trips to increase by 10% in this county, then maybe an option would be to factor this OD trip table directly.
How difficult would it be to make a utility to do something like that, Liza? That seems like that would be pretty useful for the user.
Yeah, I think that could be easily done, and a utility, an interactive, something part of the interface could be developed that would allow the user to select the county, select the percent increase or decrease, select the year to apply it, and then if there's any factoring by district, we could probably even incorporate that in. But yeah, that, you know, I mean, of course it's some effort, but that is, if that's something that,
Probably Scott could do it himself, but I mean, with your in-house ability, but just looking ahead, that seems like that would be a pretty low cost enhancement.
Hey, Rob, there's a NCFRP study that came out several years ago that looked at land use, and Thomas, I'll send you the link. But they were trying to estimate that traffic generation for different types of establishments using the commodity flow survey.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the main sources for sure. But I guess the short answer is, Scott, it's not, that capability is not in there right now.
Well, it's in there. You just have to do it manually.
Yeah, yeah, you would.
Okay, that's fine. I just you know, if you're used to going in and changing a polygon file like the county or something and expecting a result, they're not connected. Like as I said, that information that's in that file is reference information. It's not necessarily being used in the model stream.
We'll put that on Bruce's to-do list.
I was quiet on it. I didn't answer on purpose.
okay, I will move on to scenario 4, which is in Arkansas, the closure of the Mississippi River bridges and the new Madrid event. So this scenario, like I said, consists of 2 sub-scenarios. The first one is closing 2 bridges crossing between Tennessee and Arkansas. And then the second one is the new Madrid fault zone that is defined. We defined it for this scenario based on 2 sources. One was the original scope of work counties that were defined, as well as from further discussion with Virginia, there was some seismic research done by the local universities that identified some additional counties. So we included them all in this scenario. And the purpose of this scenario is to coordinate with regional and state agencies and MPOs to see how we can share our findings. In scenario 4A, here are the 2 rivers. One's on I-40, the other one on I-55. And then slide 6 shows a map of those 28 counties that are defined as being impacted dramatically by the new Madrid event, or if an earthquake were to happen. So the detailed modeling steps, again, there's 6 high-level steps, but what's unique about this scenario is we added a new centroid connector classification. For this scenario, a lot of counties were disabled. All the road system was disabled in these counties. But we still need a way to allow some traffic to load onto the highway network. Because in theory, even if people can't get to somewhere by road, they will walk and then be able to access another person's car or a taxi or Uber or something. So we added a new centroid classification to define it with a lower speed and a much lower capacity, so that it's less attractive than a typical centroid connector. Also, in this scenario, we had to do a lot of splitting of links to match county boundaries, so that we closed a road at exactly the county boundary and not a mile or two on either end. And then again, validation of the project study area was important, because we wanted to make sure that every zone has some sort of access. So whether that meant, shifting connectors or adding new ones, we had to make sure all 28 counties were reflected. We decided to add a new field called New Madrid into the master network. And this is, again, a reference field, but it's not required to make the model run. And we just wanted to define, in case Arkansas wanted to do further analysis, the different scope limits. So a value of 1 would indicate that both the scope of work, the original counties, plus the seismic research counties, 1 would indicate this county is included in both lists, whereas a 2, it's just from the scope, and when I say scope, just the scope of work defined for this project or this analysis. And then a 3 would be a county just listed in the seismic research. So when we defined the project IDs for these efforts, we had to, again, come up with the project ID and associated attributes, where the number of lanes is 0 for road closures, the additional centroid connector classification, and as I mentioned before in scenario 2, we had some overlap of projects. So we had to come up with a bit of a unique numbering system to be able to reflect both scenarios if needed. This scenario also overlapped with an E+C project. And so the E+C project attributes were updated to reflect 0 lanes for this New Madrid event. Now, the New Madrid, or the one recommendation that I would give is creating a project list for each build scenario. I find that is cleaner and maybe a little less confusing. So I tend to keep, and of course I'll share all this with you, a project list for the E+C as itself, and then a project list for each build scenario. And that project list for the build scenario includes the E+C plus the build projects. And this image, if you can read the legend, the red links show those roads that have been closed. The light blue dashed links are centroid connectors that have been closed. And then the dark blue dashed links are new centroid connectors. So those are those new links that are providing access to the roadway network, but their code is defined as, a scenario project, so that it has less attractive attributes. So looking at the daily volumes on parallel routes, scenario A, 4A, is the Mississippi River bridges closures. So the first 4 rows you'll see in the build, the volume goes to 0 on the 2 bridges. And parallel facilities such as I-155 and US 49 show a very large increase in volume. Scenario B, which is the new Madrid event, you'll see that I also included a map of these locations, which are basically I-55 to the north of the new Madrid closures, I-55 to the south, and then I-40 on the east and west ends. The volumes on all of these, for the most part, increase. And one of the reasons for that is because all the new access points from the counties in the New Madrid fault area are now loading to these facilities. Interestingly enough, the I-40 to the west decreases, and this could warrant maybe further evaluation of the Century connector placements and where the access is provided.
All right. Liz, it's Virginia.
Hi, Virginia.
Hi. I've been quiet.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying 40 to the west does drop.
Yes, 40 to the west.
But 40 to the east doubles.
Correct.
I'm having trouble with that induced traffic. Okay, because here's my question is, I understand this is not a complete and total screen line. I mean, we don't have a true screen line function here, but if we were to drop a screen line along the river, it should function as a screen line because there are limited places to cross the river. And so I think if we go, I'm having some trouble with the fact that under scenario A, we lose 40,000 trips, something like that. I just added it up real quickly. I've already moved on. And I know we talked about this on the Louisiana scenario when y'all did the preliminary results. I still think that's something that we need to be real careful about as we go forward, because while these are not true screen lines, I think that's going to be something that you're going to be questioned about, or at least we're going to be questioned about. Our administration is going to question this because that's what they look at, and so I'm a little worried because on scenario B we have 120,000 trips of induced travel. Now, I understand the concept earlier about with the truck lanes that there are other routes where people can access it, but frankly, there aren't any other bridges where people can get across the river. So I'm a little anxious about that. So I want to get in and look at the guts of that a little bit.
Okay.
And we'll be looking at that. So.
Yes, and again, I think so I don't have that map up here, but I-55, where I'm moving my cursor here, and then I think this is US 49 here. What I don't include is, what is that, 57? I-57 further to the north, which would be another.
It's in the model though, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
I just didn't include it in this table.
With a static trip table, obviously the sum total of trips should not be changing. And the other thing we don't look at on that one is 20 and 10 to see if there's any diversion that far south. So we'll be looking at that on our end. That's for sure.
Yeah, the good thing, having a model with this at this scale, you do have the option to look, several miles, look in a several mile radius to be able to see, how things are traveling, and especially for trucks, which you have those long distance trucks that really can make decision points from pretty far back.
Right.
Yeah, so I definitely urge, and I'd be glad to help you with any of that, but urge to look at a screen line, much longer than just the closest two parallel links.
Well, that, Liza, and it might be useful to drill down into 2 or 3 select links just to understand where the trips are going, and it'd be a little detective work, but I think you could do that.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, you could look at I-40 on either side of Memphis and look at the distribution, and then I think that would tell most of the story there, Virginia.
Possibly, yeah. It's like I said, it's just not into it's. I go back to the screen line every time. I mean, that's what I brought up on the Louisiana, the preliminary results, and so that's what I'm looking at. So
that's a normal question, I think. Liza, did we do a select link on I-40 for this one? I don't recall.
Not for scenario A. I mean, let's see. Yeah, I didn't put it in here. We did a select link for all of these IDs listed in the table. But but we can easily do additional ones. The model has the capability to do select link automatically.
Okay. Right, we know that. So we'll look at this. We may our modeler's not on the call today, but when we sit down with him tomorrow, Monday, we may have some more questions for you guys. So.
Sure. Okay. And I included in here the bandwidth maps. You can see going back and forth between no build and build with the bridge closures. How things shift. Oh, sorry, I keep going. And then likely for the new Madrid event, this is the no build, so volume is freely traveling, or vehicles are freely traveling wherever they want. And then when it is closed in those 28 counties, there are some much more intense volumes on interstates, which is partially due to loading points. So this, there are, after you review, there could be areas where we want to tweak some of those loadings.
Yep, we can do that.
Select links are pretty interesting to look at in this scenario. The first one to the top shows with results of how I-55 looks I-155 looks when the bridges are closed. You can see when they're open, there's a lot more direct travel patterns. When they're not. And then in the new Madrid event, when things in Memphis and to the north are closed, there's a lot more rerouting and some interesting things going on to be able to get around to get to the northern parts of the state.
Okay, so the bottom two images are for I-55 south of Memphis. So if we were to close the I-55 bridge, that you're showing a small loading to, let's see,
So
make
this,
schematics match.
the I-55 south of Memphis, that one is for scenario B, so when the new Madrid event occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't go basically straight north through Memphis. They have to go
They're going everywhere else. Okay. All right, I can work with that.
Virginia, before we get going, one of the things you mentioned is you were going to reach out to the Memphis MPO. Are you planning on doing that with this scenario?
I'm planning on doing that, exactly. I was going to show them, I was just going to share the slides with them and then see what we needed to do about maybe doing some coordination and seeing what they thought about it. I won't share the shift model itself since they're not a part of the group, but yeah, I had planned on coordinating with them and sharing these results with them so that they could see what we're thinking about and going from there. You all have requests or suggestions or anything to avoid? Okay.
No, I don't. Thank you for asking.
So, and Liza, thanks for this. Rob, same thing. I apologize. Michael and I both have to bail out now for that other obligation. So, thanks. I will look forward to anything else you guys have to post. All right?
All right.
Yeah, and Virginia, if you have any more questions, just don't hesitate to email or text or whatever.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Okay. Well, take care. All right, bye-bye.
Okay, see you. Bye.
All right.
Whittling them down slowly.
Well, and number 5 is just as exciting, in my opinion. I love the variety of scenarios that we're getting to play with.
Well, I was laughing thinking as you're going through them that it's almost like a Transcad 101 course if you go through all these scenarios.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah, but the Missouri scenario is quite interesting too, with it being a work zone scenario along I-70. The purpose of this scenario is to evaluate, the impacts of I-70 if it's going through rehabilitation by looking at a drop in number of lanes to 1 lane per direction, as well as a drop in speed to 50 miles per hour. This scenario, we looked at it in 3 sub-scenarios. So we evaluated I-70 work zone for Jackson County, Boone County, and St. Louis City County separately.
This is Rob, just interrupting. Was I-70 4 lanes in Jackson and Boone, and I guess, many more lanes in St. Louis?
It was, I can't remember if it changed. I do know that the majority of it was a 4-lane facility.
Okay, thank you.
And the purpose to see if the model could be used to consider evaluations for work zone traffic. So these are the limits of I-70 within Jackson County, going from Kansas City at the west. This is it in Boone County. This map is actually, it didn't, oops, sorry. The green should be shifted. I'll fix this image, but the links should be within the limits of Boone County. And then finally in St. Louis. Okay, skipping to the modeling steps. Like we did in the last scenario, in the Arkansas scenario, we had to add another functional classification in this work zone scenario, because the model uses a lookup table to determine capacity and speed by functional classification. And since we want a new speed for this facility, for this interstate facility, we developed a new interstate classification. So that was added to the parameter file, the speed capacity lookup table. And then all the links and the project limits were defined with a project ID. We had to split some links at the county boundaries to match the correct termini. And again, validate the network to make sure that the Century connectors are loading properly and there's correct connectivity. And then we ran the scenarios for no build and build based on the 2040 E+C scenario. So some specifics on the model coding. The first one is an example of splitting a link at the county boundary. And then the project IDs that were identified, you'll see the middle number is 9 for each of these, meaning, and the middle code reflects the functional class. So functional class equals 9 is for the interstate with a 50 mile per hour speed. So I guess that's one thing to keep in mind, is the model uses a lookup table for speed. So once you create a scenario, you may want to say, oh, what if we test this by reducing the speed in half? Well, you can't actually go in and modify that attribute manually in the network. You have to do it through the project lookup table. So that's just something to be aware of if you ever want to do that. And then we did some more validation, adding Century connectors, making sure attributes are appropriately coded. One thing we always check when defining our projects is we verify it against Google Maps or some sort of street view to make sure that the alignment is correct. And one thing we did find is I-70 was coded along I-670 instead of I-35 near Kansas City, so we had to make that adjustment. For daily volumes, I think I have a table, but I wanted to show a map first to be able to visually show the no build volume, which is on top of the link, compared to the build volume, which is on the bottom in black. And these are the selected links that I have summarized in a table, as well as doing select link analysis. So you can see here that in the no build, I-70 has 79,000 closest to Kansas City, And then when it's going under construction, it's down to about 25,000. And looking at parallel links, those highlighted in red, you see the jump of traffic that's diverted. This is a busy table on slide 14 showing the daily volumes on parallel links compared to I-70 and the percent difference between the no build and builds. But the common thing to see is I-70 in all of these has a drop of 20 to 70% in volume for the counties. And then parallel facilities all have a pretty large increase. And like the other scenarios, we plotted bandwidth flow maps. This is the plot of flows for the no build. And then when I-70 is under construction, this is for St. Louis City. You can see I'll switch back and forth. I-70 is 131,000 and drops down to 54,000. And we did select link analysis as well, looking at how parallel facilities react to I-70 being closed. And you can see both, Missouri Highway 210 and US 24 in the build scenario has much thicker bandwidths than in the no build as traffic has been diverted. And then my last slide on compatibility with other programs, as we've discussed. I'm happy to discuss that in more detail as needed. But I'd love to open it up to any questions on this scenario or any other scenario that you guys would like to talk about.
Hey, Liza, I know that I've sent out an email to everybody with the slides, and I know that we talked about another round of review for the states and any comments and clarifications. So I do appreciate you taking the time to go through these scenarios and to record it. And Rob, when I get the audio, I will post it up as well. But I did get the PowerPoint and I converted it to PDFs. And so I do appreciate it. And for the states that are still on the call, think about what comments you have, what comments you'd like to see addressed, come with your outstanding pieces about using this particular model.
Okay, well, I definitely thank you for the opportunity to be able to explain all of this, and I hope you guys are able to play with it, and I'd be happy to assist as needed.
Okay. Well, if there's no other comments or questions from anybody, I'll go ahead and we'll just call this meeting over. Any comments, final comments? Nope, I think we're all good, Rob. I thank y'all very much for doing this, and thank you for the people that are still on the call.
Thanks, Bruce. Just like we said before, any questions at all, we'll field them, and Bruce, we'll definitely have a follow-up call with you probably Monday. I don't know if I'm going to be in much tomorrow, but if we can...
Monday's not a good day for me. It'd have to be next Thursday.
Okay, so we'll just set up some for Thursday, and just by then maybe you'll have some feedback from the states and get your feedback at that point in time.
Yep, that's what I'm hoping.
thanks again, guys. Hopefully, let's avoid hurricanes and floods and all that, and earthquakes.
Yeah, I told somebody this is like the Hollywood scenario of the Southeast. Just going to blow it all to pieces.
It's been a hard couple of years, but with a good travel demand model, we're all good.
Nice recovery, Rob. Okay, well, thank all of y'all. I'll talk to y'all later.
Okay, see ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.